Our countries are therefore recognized as failed states or failing states or recovery states because the politicians who work with them have allowed the society to have ineffective institutions or illegitimate institutions that most of the people do not trust or do not believe in. Another thing about the politicians, again, fighting each other, and if at some point they don't get their way, they go to the next level. They push their problems to people who are in the city, the people who come. And so in many of our cities, from Dakar to Nairobi to Johannesburg to you name it, you will find a group of young people, a group of disgruntled people, a group of people barely educated, a group of people unemployed, but who want all they desire all the things that a modern society will have. And so therefore pray to the politicians. Mask of the city. Again, the same group of people who come to leave the countryside, move to the city. They're not fully able to survive in the city, and yet they can go back to the countryside. And these are the ones that are being manipulated by politicians. Current examples, Zimbabwe. When you hear the news on what's happening, the people that are being used by Mugabe and the people around him are terrorizing individuals, terrorizing families. And so you wonder whether the elections that will take place next week will be fair and fair elections. And so you have a situation where 3 million Zimbabweans have been forced out of their homes by thugs, by people who are manipulated, people who are being exploited. Is reflected by the Kalashnikov. And as you follow the situation in Zimbabwe, as you recall the situation in Nairobi after the January elections, and as you look at the potential developments of situations in Senegal, and if you look back to see what happened in Sierra Leone and Liberia, it was the Kalashnikov. Easy to find, easy to buy, and destructive in terms of its impact on the environment. And so free elections cannot be held, and because they cannot be held, people are being forced out of their communities and people are forced to flee. Initially, it's the individual, the person who just wants to be home, left alone. And again, the Kalashnikov forces this person to be careful. If I go this way, I disturb this group. If I go that way, I disturb. So, you know, the refugee, the potential future refugee is forced to do a balancing act. And because of his political views or how political views are not consistent with the regime, it will be long before people are killed, before the house is destroyed, before the people is forced out. Thank you very much. Kalashnikov is behind them. They pick up their children and they're forced to move. This is Jude Katete from Uganda. And from the individual, it goes to the family. Sometimes you want to go, you are not allowed to go because the families are held as human shield. And the people will be done with the mask behind, and families are held, communities are held back and forced into all kinds of depraved activity. And here, as you know, fathers are killed before their children, mothers are raped before their husbands and their wives. People are forced to do all kinds of things under very, very difficult circumstances. Engage in activities that make it very difficult for people to stay. This is from Namibia. That's the name I couldn't recall. I knew there was a third country. This is refugees in the Namibian desert, but they can also be seen as refugees in the Sudanese desert. This painting is by an artist in Angola. Although it may be an over-dramatization, but if there's anybody from South Sudan here, or if anybody had gone to work in Gambela, in Funido, and would have worked with the Lost Boys of Sudan in 1988, or in Kenya, and would have seen some of those Lost Boys arrive in the refugee camps of Ethiopia, Kenya, and Uganda. This is the way they were just skinning, almost dying. And as often is the case, it's the mothers, the children who are affected when they are forced to flee from political events and drought, dry conditions, families forced to move, and so an influx of refugees arriving, and it dampens the local communities and the local government, not always able to take care of them, and the international community 20 miles, depending on where they're coming from and how far the border is from their homes. Yes, so as they leave their countries, as they leave their communities to seek asylum in other countries. The refugees who would have crossed boundaries and are here would recognize some of these things. And when they arrive in the refugee camps, because they've been on the move for so long, their children get sick, there's no food, there's very little available. This one is called clinical queue, and for any members, persons here who work with NGOs, you would recall this is how the women line up with their children from very early in the morning, waiting for assistance to be provided to their children primarily, and afterwards to themselves. So refugees waiting in line at a public health center to receive assistance in the refugee camps. Perhaps, as I said, the people who you can see, she's been through it all, and you can see the blank, you don't need her anymore. But it's the younger woman who, traumatized, victim of abuse and rape, and can be attacked again, because it's the younger woman who will go out to the bush to get firewood. It's the younger woman who will walk to the river to get water. It's the younger woman who will go to the fields to bring food. And it is that young woman who constantly, every time, is being attacked. And you can see the expression. This is one of the paintings that I was really touched by, in terms of the impact of the displacement that's caused on refugee women. And so you have this situation called the abuse. Actually, the Zanzibar had a dark shadow of emptiness, a soul lost in barren desert, a shadow of despair that was once a virgin, undignified being, now stands a stony-faced statue of what was once an exuberant being, overwhelmed with fear and lost in thought. For the reason for living does not exist anymore, for the cause of the tragedy is all out rampant and recklessly brutal. He is the greedy and selfish politician, all out to kill, to maim and rape the innocent and the helpless. Yes, can abuse daughters of Africa. And so the women, although it's about refugee women in Africa, you can say that about Afghan refugee women, Iraqi refugee women everywhere, being abused by people with access. UN peacekeeping forces. Yes, so yes, I mean, we were there to protect them, but we are also part of the problem in terms of creating all kinds of difficult circumstances for the women who are helpless. At the food distribution line, we will give you food if you come and sleep with me at night. And so, because she has to feed her children, because they have to survive, she's forced to give herself to all of these men. And of course, in a region where they are not protected you can see with AIDS, the easy spread of the disease. So the women, not just in Africa, but everywhere, the ones who suffer most when instability, crises, conflict affect their communities, and they become refugees or internally displaced persons.